conditions.
The certification evacuation is conducted in clear conditions, with no smoke that reduces vision and overwhelms passengers. Within minutes of coming to a stop, Flight 28 filled with thick black smoke.
As soon as the smoke began to spill into the rear cabin and then flow forwards, essentially that induced immediate panic in those who were so affected by the smoke, because their respiration, I mean, the typical comment was, I took one breath of smoke and I felt as though my lungs were solidifying. You can imagine under these conditions that people have got to get away from the smoke. And the people did this by basically clambering over the seats and other people in front of them.
In less than 5 minutes, what should have been a survivable accident turned deadly. To prevent future tragedies, Britain's Civil Aviation Authority decides to learn more about people. Helen Muir is a psychologist and a leading expert on how airplane design can influence survival. She's asked to study the behavior of passengers on Flight 28 to figure out why so many died.
What we had to learn to do was to design the aircraft interior so even if we had what we might say was dysfunctional behaviour in totality, we could accommodate the needs of individuals and their desperate rush to get out.
Muir configures a cabin to duplicate Flight 28 and fills it with volunteers. Then, to have them act as though the plane's on fire, she offers money to the first ones off.
And that produced behaviour that was quite unbelievable. People went over seats, they went round, past each other, all sorts of things. And indeed, when survivors from the actual Manchester accident came and saw the videos, they said, yeah, that's how it was.
The evacuation of Flight 28 was slowed by the fact that passengers became jammed in the bulkhead opening separating the main cabin from the galley. Investigators discover the logjam was created by the design of the Boeing 737. The bulkhead opening was 22.5 inches wide, just enough for one person to fit through.
But what they wanted to know was how much wider would they have to make it for people not to get stopped and blocked. We were trying to do as much as we could to recreate the situation which had happened at Manchester and then to systematically vary the aircraft interior to see what changes would improve the situation for passengers.
Muir's tests showed the narrow bulkhead opening created bottlenecks that flight attendants had to constantly clear. Increasing the width to 30 inches greatly improved the movement of passengers.
But we showed through repeat testing that if you changed the minimum gap from 20 to 30 inches, you would dramatically improve the speed at which people could get out, and you'd reduce the likelihood of people falling and slipping and so on.
As a result of Helen Muir's work, a recommendation was made to increase the space between the bulkhead walls to 30 inches and introduce strip lighting to help guide passengers to exits even when they are blinded by smoke. Muir also found a way to improve cabin safety without redesigning the cabin.
Please sit down.
She conducted research on the behavior of the cabin crew in emergencies and found that passengers get off a plane much faster with a highly assertive crew.
It's because we don't want people really making their own decisions. We want people to do exactly what the cabin crew or the procedures state, and we don't want people hesitating, particularly at the door.
Helen Muir's research prompted manufacturers to redesign cabins to make them safer. But one safety feature remains controversial: smoke hoods. Ed Trimble believes they should be mandatory on all commercial flights.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Helen Muir is less convinced. She's studied how smoke hoods affect passenger behavior and is worried they would slow down the orderly evacuation of an airplane.
We know you've only got literally 1.5 to 2 minutes for everybody to get out. What we don't want to have is something which is difficult to put on, and so it slows people getting down.
The most important lesson of British Air Tours Flight 28 is that seconds matter. It's now universally accepted that it takes 90 seconds from the first sign of fire before it becomes unsurvivable. The passengers on Flight 28 lost valuable time when the starboard side door jammed. The investigators determined that the slide mechanism deployed too early, preventing the door from opening. There was a flaw that led the slide container's lid to jam if the door is opened too quickly. After the Manchester accident, Boeing quickly redesigned the system so that couldn't happen. But the recommendations made by the AAIB weren't adopted quickly enough to save lives 6 years later. In 1991, a Boeing 737 slammed into another plane on the runway in Los Angeles and caught fire. Many of the 22 people who died were overcome by smoke before they could get out. But in 2005, the crash of an Air France jet in Toronto showed how much has changed since the Manchester accident. All 309 people got off that plane in just 90 seconds. No one died. Some major changes to commercial airliners
all right, the door's open.
came about because of a flight that never left the ground.
That's the only way I can resolve it, with the death of 55 of my passengers. The fact that flying is now safer.
I can't imagine anybody, doesn't wish that it hadn't happened. Despite what's been learned and despite maybe the subsequent lives that have been changed, you'd give anything for it not to have happened.